Welcome back, baseball fans. 1972-75 carryover league off-season. Keep, waive, retire. We're getting the math as close to draftable in segments. We started last week with looking at the first eight teams in the draft. We look at this number in this column here is how many guys they presently are keeping, waiving, and retiring. And so there's a lot of bad math in here that has to be fixed before we draft. And this is a process that takes up the beginning part. Usually takes up the beginning part of the off season, then there's a lull, then there's some more trades right before the draft, and the draft starts in March 2024. Also, none of these trades are complete until all the teams have the correct number of keeps, waives, and retires. That's why I call it a lazy Susan or a carousel. It's like everybody puts their chips on their table, they take chips off the table, and if everybody's happy with what they put out and what they got back in return, think of it as like one 32-team trade session. So last week, we went to our first 8 teams. And a lot of these teams got if you look at the first number, everybody has to have 4. Believe it or not, Florida added a guy in this round, and Texas lost a guy in this round. But that's all right. There's still plenty of time to get to the proper math before the draft. Sometimes, in the case of moving up and down from the number of players, you acquire draft tokens, which is like a move in the draft. It's a transaction that you have over another team in the draft. So last week we did teams 1 through 8, and so tonight we're going to look at what teams 9 through 16 have done with their first crack of realigning their roster. We'll begin with Seattle, who started with 6 guys they wanted to keep, a waiver and a retire, and they're down to 5 guys they want to keep with a waiver and 2 retires. We'll just go right to Seattle here and confirm the 50102, and there it is. And so in this round of the draft, these are trades from last week. We're going to scroll down a little bit till I get to the first trade. This is a nice little trade here. Seattle and Florida made a deal. Seattle had to get rid of a righty reliever because they wanted to make room for Skip Lockwood to become their closer as he turns into a relief pitcher in 75. So they're sending Florida the rights to Felipe Alou and a nice relief pitcher, Diego Segui. And they'll get back a retired player that they can they don't need to account for that, and Rich Folkers, a lefty reliever. I was contemplating using a token balancer, but frankly, I didn't think it was required, because getting a lefty reliever for Folkers is very valuable. And I know Alou and Segui are good players, but they're getting near the end of their career, or at least Alou is. Just not worth enough mustard to make it need something to balance it out. I found it to be fair enough. And with that single transaction, Seattle lost one of their keepers, Alou, so they're down to 5. Does Seattle make another move? No, that's the next team. Let's go take a look at the next team. So the next team is Colorado. Now, Colorado had to get a little busy here. They started this process with like 2 guys they wanted to keep. It was Dave Kingman and Phil Gagliano. They needed to find guys, comb the rest of the league for teams who have too many keepers, the teams that have like a 5 or a 6, or in this case the Mets started with an 8, believe it or not. A 5 here, a 6 here. They had to find somebody's bonus keepers so they could find somebody to draft. And they improved by 1. Let's see what the Rockies did. Colorado made a few moves in this round, but the first move in this round was a trade with the Texas Rangers. And in this trade, they wanted a catcher. They lost both their catchers in the offseason, Jack Hyatt and J.C. Martin, to retirement. So they acquired Dave Duncan, a power-hitting catcher from Texas, along with Eddie Watt, nice relief pitcher. And they sent the Rangers Joe LaHood, who is an outfielder who can, well, at least he can field better than the guys that Texas currently employs. And Mel Queen, who was Colorado's closer, but right now he's only about a waiver quality player, not worth being a keeper. So the Rangers will probably put him on waivers. So because of the value the Rangers get in this one, they have to fork up a token because they're getting a starting catcher and a quality reliever, and all the Rangers get is Joe LaHood. So with that, they bump it up to 1. Now they have Gagliano, Kingman, and Duncan. They're still at 302.03, but they're going to wait. A lot of teams are just sitting and waiting for a keeper from another franchise to fall in their lap without having to give up anything for it. But Dave Duncan was too good to pass up. They had no catchers whatsoever. They had J.C. Martin on waivers. They had Jack Hyatt on retirement. And just getting Dave Duncan, I know he's only like a 220 hitting catcher, but he's perfect Colorado Rocky. All home runs, not much else. So that's a nice pickup for the Rockies. They'll make another trade a little bit later in this round. The next team, and again, the way this works is when a team is on the clock, they can start making deals, and then they decide to pass, and they've passed it to Arizona. And Arizona started with a perfect math, and they might be content. Let's see if Arizona dipped their toes into the trade pool. They did not. So Arizona, let's take a look at them. We haven't looked at them yet. Doesn't mean they're going to finish, but Arizona might go into the draft looking at Steve Braun, left-hand hitting third baseman, Merv Retman, a starting corner outfielder, Darryl Knowles, a lefty setup guy, Pat Jarvis. This guy is, you could probably find a better guy to keep than that. So I think Arizona still has work to do in this offseason. The 2 wavered and 2 retired guys bringing the good math. Let's go to the next team here, and I think we're getting to the Angels and the Mets. The Angels, I think they paused at this point because they made moves at the end of the previous round. We're going to go right to the Mets because we have a big, huge trade there. Wow, the Mets started with 8 guys they all wanted to keep with, and no waves and retires. They were able to trade Cleon Jones and Danny Frizella to Las Vegas to get on to 6, and now we get down to 5. Let's see what they did. This is the big trade the Mets made to get Staub. We have a trade in place, and here we are. Here is the big 3-team trade. The Mets are going to unload Ed Kranepool, believe it or not, a lifetime Met, but frankly, they do not have room in this offseason. Sorry, Ed. The Mets just don't have room for you because the Mets have Tom Seaver, Bud Harrelson, Tug McGraw, and Rusty Staub, who they're getting in this trade. So they're unloading Ed Kranepool and Willie Mays, who still has life left in him, believe it or not. The Giants are going to move Fran Healy and a green player is a guy who's on the current roster, the 72 Jesus Alou. And the Expos are going to move 3 guys, Rusty Staub, Mike Marshall, the reliever, and this retired player, Rich McKinney. So the way this transaction works, the Mets, Kranepool ends up on the Expos, Willie Mays ends up back on the Giants. But it costs the Mets a token because they're going to land Rusty Staub. They're going to land Rusty Staub and a retired player. The Giants get Mike Marshall out of this deal, the reliever that the Dodgers were supposed to get for Willie Davis. But the Giants stepped in and made this move. And in doing so, both the Mets and the Giants had to give individual tokens to the Expos. And why is that? Because the Expos lost Rusty Staub, they lost Mike Marshall, a retired player. The 2 players they got back is Jesus Alou and Fran Healy. But that's just not enough for... Oh, and Ed Kranepool. And so they were able to also get the 2 tokens in the deal for that. So that's a good financial move for the Expos, collecting these tokens. And they got 3 players, for Pete's sakes. They gave up Staub, Marshall, and McKinney. They got Alou, Fran Healy, and Ed Kranepool. You could almost argue that Ed Kranepool and Rusty Staub are about as could have been traded for each other here. But we gave the Expos more value in this. This is a pretty good deal for the Expos. They unfortunately did not get Willie Davis yet to patrol center field, and they might not because they have Boots Day who can play center field. Let's look at the Mets now. After this big deal went down, so now the Mets are almost perfect here. They're going to keep Bud Harrelson, Rusty Stahl. We can now confirm the trade was made, so we'll put exclamation points there. Tom Seaver and Tug McGraw. And now the only other keeper they have is Gary Gentry. Nice little pitcher. Unfortunately, he may have to go on waivers if nobody wants to deal with the Mets anymore. But at least we know that those four guys, primary Mets players, Harrelson, Stahl, Tom Seaver, McGraw, will continue. And the Mets were terrible last year, and now they have a chance to flip the script and get back into first place. Nice little move there, and they were done at that portion of the carousel. All right, the Brewers are making some moves here. The Brewers, unfortunately, had only two guys they wanted to keep and a bunch of guys they put on waivers. And so they had to make moves, which means they had to move some tokens and so forth as well. Let's take a look at the Brewers. So the Brewers have good math now, 40301. And the trades they made to get to pretty good math. This is a nice little trade here, no tokens involved. They would trade Jose Cardinal and Sam McDowell to the Chicago Cubs for Earl Stevenson and Johnny Briggs. And you can look at it a couple of different ways there. You almost think that either team could have the better end of this deal. The Cubs had Cardinal in 72. Cardinal played for the Cardinals, the Brewers, and eventually a nice little stretch for the Cubs before ending up later in the decade on the Expos and then the Royals. Earl Stevenson actually is a Brewer, so these players here and here, they went to their appropriate team. So this was the perfect trade partners. That guy and that guy getting onto the right place. The Cubs have the rights to Sam McDowell. They'll most likely put him on waivers, though he's intriguing as they don't have a lefty starter. So they could figure that you're not going to do better than Sam McDowell. You might as well keep him. Johnny Briggs is the prize here. So he has about 4 years in a row where he's a pretty good hitter, left-hand hitting player. He played for Philadelphia and Milwaukee. He goes back to Milwaukee. There was a temptation to put a token in here, but we did not. We liked what the Cubs got because even though McDowell is on waivers, there's a reasonable chance that the Cubs might change that designation and make him a keeper. They weren't done either with the Brewers. Nice little move here with three teams. And this is just walking down the line. The Brewers took a waived player, an outfielder, sent him to the Expos. And Fran Healy, who the Expos picked up in this trade up here, was then moved to his rightful team, the Kansas City Royals, who Fran Healy played for and did pretty well. And then Pat Kelly, who the White Sox didn't want and the Royals didn't want, ends up in the same division on Milwaukee. So Kelly takes an outfield spot that Cardinal once had. So when you look at these teams involved in these deals, oh, and there's one more deal involved with the Brewers. Straight up here, this is like a perfect where need meets need. Active 72 cards, Ollie Brown traded from the Padres to Milwaukee for Ken McMullen. San Diego needed a third baseman desperately. And San Diego also wanted to free up an outfield spot so they can get up Dave Winfield. Their outfield was clogged up with outfielders, so they had to unload a right fielder with a cannon arm, Ollie Brown, to make room for another one, Dave Winfield. And so Ollie Brown and Pat Kelly take up roster spots on Milwaukee where Rick Reichert and Jose Cardinal were. So let's take a look. Let's start with Milwaukee here since they're up. So they're at 40301. They're going to add Pat Kelly to their outfield, joining Ben Oglivie, joining Ollie Brown, joining Steve Hovley, who can play center field. Johnny Briggs can play a designated hitter. He'll be moved there. Let's look at Kansas City, because they were in the first round, but not in this one. Kansas City picked up Fran Healy for Pat Kelly in that transaction, so they look like they're set. Fran Healy, their catcher, Patek, Rojas, and Splittorff. These are all Kansas City players on Kansas City. It seems like they are done. They're ready to go and draft. They're in good shape. And of course, the other team is the Expos, and they're still red hot. They're still making deals. They've been making deals. They're currently at 50201, but we still have a Ken Singleton to the Orioles for Dave McNally trade that hasn't even been brought up yet because they're not on the clock yet. But we can go to the next team on the clock after Milwaukee, and we'll do that with just two more teams tonight. It's the Padres and the Astros. The Padres only had 3 guys they wanted to keep, and they did make a few moves to kind of tighten this roster a little bit. Let's take a look at the Padres. So the Padres had Dave Roberts, the left-handed pitcher, on their team with a brilliant 71 season. But then after that, he starts to become just mediocre. And they trade him to the Astros, which is what actually happened in traditional MLB. So I kind of continued that path. They did get Bob Johnson in the deal, and now they've got a bunch of righties. Let's take a look at the transaction here. Here was the deal. The Padres sent Dave Roberts to Houston. Houston had 2 keepers, and they needed to get rid of one. They had a bonus, so they had to get rid of 2 to acquire the one. So they sent Bob Johnson to San Diego and Frank Lindsay to California. California had Cesar Tovar as a keeper, but he's going to be sent to Houston, and they might put him on waivers. So that was a transaction there with those 3 teams. And then another move, and I think that's the last move tonight. San Diego sent a right-handed reliever, Mike Corkins, to the Colorado Rockies for a left-handed reliever, Jim Schellenbach. And the Colorado Rockies were able to get a token for that because left-handed relievers are more valuable. So Colorado did get a token on that. And that, with the Padres getting Schellenbach as a lefty, that takes up the left-handed spot Dave Roberts had on that roster. So let's look at these last few teams. Here's the Padres. They're going to have Bob Johnson, Clay Kirby, Randy Jones, and Fry Slavin. That's your rotation. And Kirby and Fry Slavin can pitch on 3 days rest. Randy Jones is a lefty, Johnson's a righty. In your bullpen, you got Sprague. You added Schellenbach, a lefty. You're going to make Bob Miller, bring him back. So all you got to do is replace Joe Gibbon. And you clear the decks of some outfielders while adding Kevin McMullen to play third base. And now you can add Dave Winfield to the Padres. Houston, after making all those moves, the Joe Morgan move, now they got to a point where they got 4 pretty good keepers. Tommy Helms, Ken Forsch, a lefty reliever, Steve Mangori. He was part of that blockbuster Joe Morgan deal. And left-handed starter, Dave Roberts. Mike Cosgrove is the 3rd and final left-hander in their bullpen because the 4th, Denny LeMaster, is retired. So it's a good, and they already have Larry Durker. So they're in really good shape as far as their knowing what their pitching is going to be going into the season. They lost Joe Morgan, of course, replacing him with Tommy Helms. And so they could improve with a rookie class in their outfield for the Astros. I think we mentioned the Cubs made a deal to get Cardinal back. So by doing that, now the Cubs have 4 guys they want to keep: Beckert, Kessinger, Fergie Jenkins, and Lloyd Allen. They lost Briggs, but now Cardinal's in their outfield now. Where's Jose? Well, he's in the... I moved the rows around to match the year. And eventually, when it's time to draft, all the hitters will be here and all the pitchers will be here. But right now, Cardinale is in the outfield along with Billy Williams. They have Del Unser in center, who could be a trade chip. They don't need him anymore. With Cardinale, you can move him to center field. You still have Jim Hickman in that Cub outfield. Bill Matlock is still probably going to be a DH because you got Ron Santo at third and Kessler coming back at short. And was there another team involved in the trades that we haven't looked at yet in this particular round? We looked at Seattle, Colorado, Arizona, California. We could take another look at California. We didn't look at them in this round. Not sure. They're still unsure who the fifth guy will be. They didn't want Tovar anymore. We knew that because they had outfield was full. They had Don Baylor. They had Mickey Rivers. They have what's the other outfielder they have here? Oh, Richie Scheinblum is an outfielder. So they really had no room for him. Frank Lindsay might be the keeper here since they're putting 2 right-handed relievers on waivers. So it could be that Jim Spencer might be moving on, or Frank Lindsay, I think. One of those 2 guys are probably moving on. But there's still time to do that. And moving forward here, we've done trades in this region here. And when you look over into this column here, you're looking for that first digit to become a 4. And Seattle still has one more move to make. They have 5. Colorado is waiting with 3 for somebody to fall in their lap, as are the Padres, which is probably good to do since they're not very good teams. Just wait. Why make a deal when someone can just come to you for free? And the Angels and Mets still have a guy that they need to purge from their rosters. So when we do this again next week, we're going to go to the next group of 8 teams, which are these: Minnesota, Cleveland, St. Louis, the Expos, Portland, the Cubs, Yankees, and Toronto. We expect the Expos to make a move with Baltimore to acquire Dave McNally with 2 quality years still in his career. So they're going to make this Kenny Singleton McNally trade, but it's going to be better for the Expos because they're going to require McNally with some good tread on his tires. So that's the biggest trade I can forecast in this next section. And that'll be next week, and we'll do this in quarters, so we'll go 17 and 24 next week. All right, that's it tonight for looking at the Keep Waive Retires of 1972 to 1975. Thanks for checking this out, and we'll see you next time.